I shouldn't say that, because when I say that at home, my wife goes, it sure must be nice to live in your world. I go, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, good morning. We are after a little detour in American Gospel. We are back to small church essentials this morning. We still need to pray for him. Oh, you weren't here last week to see this, huh? Basically, he repented of. First, we showed a video where he blasted the movie and called them heretics, and they were it was demonic or satanic. Yeah, anyway, and then later on, he taught how he repented. He talked about it was so funny because I'll have to show you the little clip at home, because one of the things he's telling this group, and it just made me laugh sort of, but it kind of tells you that these people who teach these things are kind of insulated, because he said, I've been reading this guy named Spurgeon. Any of you heard of him? He's dead. So anyway, but now there's some more stuff coming out where he's kind of back to attacking them again, so just keep praying for him. Okay, so we are on part 1 of Small Church Essentials, but we are on lesson 2, and we're going to try to finish that up this morning in the time we have left, okay? And lesson 2 is embracing the small church without settling. Again, I want us to pull us into Scripture first. So Matthew 28, 19 through 20, and Acts 2:46, those are our go-to verses every time right now, for at least for the next several lessons. Okay, Matthew 28, 19 through 20. Anybody remember what that is?
Great Commission.
That's the Great Commission, right? That's what those are the church's marching orders. We are told there to do what in the Great Commission?
Go.
To go,
Make
disciples, not converts or decisions, to baptize, and to teach. And what? And remember, okay? So that's the church's job. We always, if we're going to be a healthy church, we always have to go back to this and say, are we doing the basics that Jesus told us to do? If we're not, and that means that we have to be, in other words, for us to do this as a church, we have to be doing it as individuals. Okay? If we're not being obedient and we're not healthy. In Acts, okay, more directly, this is the early church, and God adds to the church through what they were doing. In Acts 2:46, they were devoted to one another. Okay, in other words, they came to church not primarily. They gathered, of course, primarily to worship, but they were devoted to one another. They came and supported one another. They were devoted to meeting together. Meeting together was important to them. Okay, it was vital. They fellowshiped together, which means they did things together, not just met to worship and sing and teach, but they fellowshiped together, and they had joyful and sincere hearts. In other words, there was no fake Christians in the church. There was no people with insincere hearts. These were people who genuinely loved the Lord, loved one another, and loved meeting each other. Okay, so this is the healthy church that we want to be. We've talked briefly then about the types of healthy churches and why they stay small. I don't know if you remember that. We talked about planting churches, training churches, house churches, retirement community churches, niche churches, impoverished churches, persecuted churches, transitional churches, and rural churches. Okay, and we discussed a little bit about what kind of church we were. We were sort of I think we took 2 or 3 of those and kind of applied it to us. We were certainly the rural church, but we had some other types too.
I thought we decided we were the good-looking church.
And well, yeah, we were the good-looking church. That's.
And humble.
We're the weird church.
Yeah.
I'm helping.
And then we talked about the small church shepherd or pastor, okay, and what that looks like. So we're going to now move on to, again, this doesn't mean being small doesn't mean we're settling, okay. So the world really needs more healthy small churches. The reality is that we need more healthy churches, period, small and large. Right? Healthy is the goal. But as we said in the very first lesson, since the majority of all churches fall under the category of small, we need to make sure that our small church is healthy. Okay? There have been churches that have shut their doors that have been larger than ours. Okay?
Weird.
Yeah, they've given up, okay, and they've shut their doors because, and they've had more people coming than what we have coming, right? But hopefully, we don't want to shutter this church. Do you?
Nope.
I don't want to do it, okay?
The building's pretty fun.
I don't want to shutter it. I want to see what God can do here. So, again, if we grow, and I hope we do, it's doubtful we'll ever move beyond 100 people or so at the most, okay? Not impossible, because with God, nothing is impossible, okay? But even if we grow, statistically, we will then still remain what's considered a small church. So if we're going to exist here as a church, regardless of our size, let's be healthy. That means Doug needs to be healthy in his walk with Christ, and Brenda, and Dina, and John, and myself, and David, and Michelle. We all have to be, if one of us is not healthy in our walk with Christ, that means our church is what? Not healthy, okay? Now, depends on how many of us aren't healthy, depends just on how sick we are, right? I consider myself fairly healthy, but a doctor would tell me, in fact, I remember several years ago, the doctor told me, asked me if, this is when I was only about, I think, 30 pounds overweight. He asked me if I wanted the good news or the bad news. And I said, well, which one did I want first after my physical? And I said, well, give me the good news. And he said, well, the good news is, for a man 30 pounds overweight, you are in extremely good health. And I thought, well, that's good. I go, what's the bad news? He said, you are 30 pounds overweight. Okay? So I was extremely healthy, but that part of my life wasn't healthy. So my whole life was unhealthy, but part of it was unhealthy, and that unhealthy part will infect other parts eventually. So we all need to examine ourselves and our faith and our walk on a regularly, consistent, ongoing basis. Okay? There is a reason that small churches exist when it comes right down to it. And I believe it's because small churches are needed. Okay? Some people need a small church. Right? Big churches are both big and small. Okay? They're big numerically, and the small portion, though, comes from their small groups. They have small groups to meet, and they get some intimacy in that. But some people just don't want to walk into a church where there's 1,000 people, or 500 people, or 400 people, or 300 people. Okay? They don't want to, that's too big for them. Okay? Some people will thrive better in their spiritual lives when they are pastored by their pastor, not a small group leader. Okay? And they're not wrong for wanting and needing that. Because in a large church, you have several pastors usually. You have a senior pastor, an assistant pastor, a youth pastor, some you have an administrative pastor, and then usually you have small group leaders who wind up, those be sort of, basically, if you need prayer, that's who you call. You don't call the senior pastor, okay? Then the small group leader winds up calling the senior pastor. And that way, and we may think that seems cold and indifferent, but it's actually practical. Because if you got a church with 1,000 people, you don't want 1,000 people calling you all the time with what's going on. You have, you break that down to 20 small group leaders or whatever it is, and you have those people call you. And it doesn't mean the pastor doesn't reach out, but some people don't like that idea. They want to be pastored by the pastor, okay? So they thrive better under that. In some small churches, in some churches, small groups are problematic. Okay? They become the perfect petri dish for dissatisfaction, cliques, and complaints. That happened here. Okay? We went to small groups on Wednesdays because people were saying they couldn't all gather, they couldn't come down the hill from here for Wednesday for this. So we broke up into small groups, but some of those small groups, they created dissatisfaction with the church and cliques and problems and issues, and it didn't work well. Okay? So small groups are not necessarily the answer. All right? Sometimes small is necessary in order for people to grow and be healthy, committed followers of Christ. What we have to understand, though, is even small churches can be cliquish. Okay? The other thing is that when you're small like like we are and a visitor comes in, okay? See, if a visitor comes into a large church, if they want to hide, they can. Okay, it's easy. They want to come in and not be noticed, unless the church does a really good job of greeting and reaching out to first-time visitors. Okay, and having, a lot of times when I go on vacation, especially if I go out of town, but even if I don't, I go visit other churches. And I tend to go visit churches that are unlike ours, because I kind of want to see what the other side's doing. You know, I kind of want to, it's just part of the vacation process for me. And I've been to small churches like ours. I've been to Calvary Chapel churches, Baptist churches, non-denominational churches, much bigger, larger churches. And you know what? I would only say about 50% of them made me feel welcome and at home and greeted me when I came. There are some that I went in, sat down, and left, and nobody ever talked to me. Okay? But I'm sure if you asked them if they thought their church was friendly, they'd say yes. Okay? So we have to make sure that we fight against that. Okay? It's just like when we first took a look at the state of our building and how things looked. We'd seen all of that stuff for some time. And probably every once in a while some of us thought about it. But I don't think we ever thought about making it. When we made the list, we realized just how bad it was. But we kind of got used to it. It was normal for us. So that's what we want to make sure we don't do. We want to be friendly to people who come and help them feel as much a part as they can. Obviously, they're not a part. Okay? So, but we need to make them feel as much a part or welcome by us as Christians. Okay? As we can. So, being small doesn't mean we settle. There's a reason for different types of small churches. The world needs healthy small churches. And so finally, in this section, I think this is the last part, or the next to last, many people, the truth is many people just won't go to a big church. They won't. They're not going to. You can flip that around. Many people won't go to a small church either. They want to know what ministries you have. Do you have men's and women's and kids and nursery and outreach and this and that? I mean, you know, all kinds of stuff, okay? But let's face it, some people prefer their church experience to be small. From the corporate executive who wants to slow down on the weekend, to the parents who prefer keeping their children in an intergenerational environment instead of another divided by age classroom, small simply works best for them. It's what they prefer. Okay? Nothing wrong with that. Okay? It's just a preference. And again, we're gonna say this over and over again because I want us to really make sure we get this. Don't forget, small does not have to mean not healthy or not growing. We can be small and still be both of those. In fact, we should be both of those. It's not as if big churches are dying, okay? Even though some people won't go, or a lot of people won't go, they're not. In fact, they're growing. One just came to Yuba City not that long ago with lots of money and bells and whistles from their mother church, okay? And I'll be honest with you, okay? I get frustrated by that sometimes. Okay? And not just because we're a small church up here in Loma Rica, but I still think of all the other churches in Yuba City. And part of me thinks, do we really need, because when a church like that moves in, the first thing they do is they pull from other churches, usually. Okay? Maybe the disenfranchised, maybe some people are just attracted to the latest thing. One thing I found once I became a pastor here, and I was a pastor before, it was a really outlying area. I mean, it was on the outskirts of Chico. I didn't really associate with any other, those were the churches that felt like they were the only church. So I didn't really associate with other pastors. I didn't really know what was going on. But having been a pastor here, what I find is that there are trends, even in our local area. There's always the hot church, okay? It's the hot church for a while, and it grows, and then it plateaus, and then it shrinks a little bit, and then it kind of hits a settling period, and it's still there, but it's not the hot church anymore. So this church is probably the hot church right now. Everywhere I turn around, I hear about it. I hear people going there, I hear things. They bring in famous guest speakers and pay them lots of money and all kinds of stuff they do. Okay?
They were reaching out and to the lost. and bringing the lost in and say, God bless you.
Yeah.
Because there's no, don't stop, don't put a limit on that.
What church was that?
I'm not gonna name the name.
Oh.
I'll tell you afterwards if you want to know. I'm not gonna, because, and here's why. Because, I don't know that they're not reaching the lost. And I don't know that maybe some of the people they're pulling from other churches are people who, they need that church, and God is going to work through the. I'm not saying that God's not using them or that He can't use them. I'm just simply saying, did they really need that? Okay, that's the question. That's the question I have, and I'm not alone. Actually, pastors of some fairly large churches in the U.S. area I've talked to have felt the same way. So it's not a small church pastor thing. It's a thing of wondering. So large churches aren't going away. Okay, they're here to stay, and we have to understand that. And I don't want you to think that I don't think they're not meeting a need. I think obviously they are to some degree in certain areas. They're thriving, and I believe that they're blessing a lot of people. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people go to them in the first place. Granted, I also know people go there because some people go to large churches because they don't have to get intimately involved. Because, especially if they don't become part of a small group, they could miss church for 3 or 4 weeks doing other things, and nobody's going to call and find out where they were. Nobody's going to really, because it's one, or even if you have a church of 1,000 and 10% of your people are gone one Sunday, you're going to notice a few empty seats, but it's 100 people. You still got 900 people there, okay? For some people, obviously, that they prefer the anonymity of a large church, okay? But I'm sure that they are meeting a number of needs, in areas that we're not, and that's okay. That's okay. Okay. One of the things I have to guard myself against is remembering we are not in competition with other churches. We're all on the same team. Okay.
It's kind of like fighting the war where the Army says, oh, that darn Air Force.
Yeah.
Playing something like this. Well, could they drop bombs on people that are trying to kill you?
But the truth is, they're just not for everyone. They're not. Okay. We want to be here at Lone Ranger Baptist Church to make sure there are equal options for people who prefer the smaller church worship experience. And we're obviously not alone. All the churches in the foothills here are small. Okay. All of them are small. I would be really surprised if somebody were to try to plant another church in the foothill area. That would be kind of odd, I think I'd say. You got, every church here is like considered small. You got another small church. But that's the nature kind of where we are, because we're an urban church, and that creates that they're generally small. Well, the other thing we have to look at, I forgot, I got actually 2 more points real quick. God just might have a plan for the small church, right? And we all must agree that God's ways are higher than ours. See, here's the difference. We cannot think, and don't misunderstand me, let me start this first. We cannot think of the church as a business. That doesn't mean she can't benefit from business principles. She absolutely can. And if she has good businessmen, she needs to listen to them, okay? She absolutely can. But she's not a business, because nobody sets out to create a small business. Right? Nobody says, well, I want to have a small business, we only have like a couple customers a day. Nobody says that, okay? You want your business to grow and to thrive, and but we have to agree that when it comes to the church, God's ways are higher than ours. We must remember the church is His idea and not ours. If it was our idea, we'd do some things a lot different probably. We just would. While we must do our best to discern His will and to carry out church as we see in Acts and as we see in the Great Commission, we must also, with humility, recognize that the Lord may have a plan for our church that can only be fulfilled by being small and healthy. Okay? And I want to put healthy in there because it's not just being small, it's being small and healthy. And to close, I want to close with this last point, because this seems to be the mindset of so many. Grow it or close it are not the only options. Okay? Grow it or close it are not the only options. Many healthy churches remain small, and what they need is they need encouragement and they need resources. Okay? I'm not saying that. One thing I don't want to say in some ways is people say, well, anything a small church can do, a large church can do better. Not necessarily so. And other people say, well, small churches or large churches, there's nothing a small church can do that a large church can't do. Not necessarily true either. Okay, they both have their own. They both have ministries and people they can reach that the other can't. Okay, but most small pastors, I'm one of them. Okay, I felt this way for a long time. I felt like I've only ever been given two options when it comes to pastoring a church. You got to grow it, or sooner or later you got to close it. Okay. Now, obviously, I remember John. I'm sharing this. I'll share this with the church when we had the last couple of families that left, when the Johnsons and the Hollingsheads left, and that was a blow to me, because we went from being small then to being tiny. And I sat down from John. I asked him. I said, I was just because. He was part of, that was just before we made him a deacon, him and James. But still, he'd been here long enough now that I looked to him and his wisdom and wanted to know what he thought. And I was very encouraged when he said, well, because I asked John, I said, how does it make you feel like leaving? And John said, well, something along the lines of, I suppose, he goes, I'm here for the duration until it gets down to maybe just you and me. And then maybe we have to relook at this. So obviously you can't get so small that you do need to close, okay? But it doesn't have to be either grow it or close it. And this comes from everywhere. Sometimes it's membership. Sometimes it's people. I had people sit here in the church and tell me, if you're a healthy church is a growing church, which I agree. But then I had to ask them, are you healthy? What are you doing to contribute to growth? Sometimes it's from visitors. People come in and they see a small church, they think there must be something wrong because it's small. I've heard that. I don't know how many of you have heard, well, look at that large church, God must be blessing them. Right? Have you ever heard that?
Yeah, but I've also heard, look at that large church, they must be doing something wrong.
Right, I've heard that. Oh yeah, because God is, it's a minority and all the, narrow is the way. Both of those mindsets are wrong and not biblical, okay? Sometimes it comes from other pastors and teachers, well-meaning pastors and teachers. That happens. And sometimes it comes from the culture. After all, we live in a culture that is obsessed with bigger is better, right? Bigger is better. Nobody wants a small TV, everybody wants a big TV. Right? Bigger is better. Nobody wants a small paycheck, everybody wants a bigger paycheck. Bigger seems to be better. And the church has often adopted that same mindset. So some people feel this church should become healthy as a stepping stone to becoming bigger. Like, let's get healthy and then we can become bigger. But every church needs to be healthy, no matter the size. If we're looking at becoming healthy so that we can become bigger, then I don't think we're going to be healthy. Because that's the wrong reason to be healthy. We need to be healthy because what? Because God tells us to be. All right? He tells us to be obedient, and if we're going to be obedient, we'll be healthy. So, if so many of the churches in the world are small, maybe we don't have a size problem as much as maybe we have a health problem. Again, in both small and large. So imagine, I'm going to close with this. Imagine if every small church became healthy, strong, and vibrant. And many are. Okay? If that were to really happen, would being small matter anymore?
Wouldn't think about it as much.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that would no longer be the focus, right? So we're going to close with that this morning. We'll go into lesson 3 next week. But in order for us to be healthy, in order for our church to be healthy, we must be healthy spiritually. And as the pastor, sometimes I can, after spending time with people, I can kind of do a spiritual diagnosis and I can tell whether somebody's healthy or not. But for the most part, it has to be a self-examination. Okay? That's where it has to come from. Any questions before we dismiss? Thoughts? Disagreements? Arguments, no, okay. All right, we'll take a quick break. Give John time to get